The World Bank recently released a report titled Reclaiming Momentum Towards Poverty, Pakistan's Poverty and Resilience Assessment. The report talks about Pakistan's once promising poverty reduction trajectory that has come to a troubling halt, with the poverty rate rising by 7 percentage points between 21-22 and 2023-24 to reach 25.3%. While we discussed key aspects of the report last week, today we will also discuss details around Pakistan's middle class, persistent inequalities, nation's love for elites and poor social indicators. I am Udit Bubna and I will explain what this report says in detail and why this is significant. According to the report, Pakistan had dramatically reduced poverty from 64.3% in 2001 to 21.9% in 2018, declining by 3 percentage points annually until 2015, before slowing to less than 1 percentage point per year. You can look at the chart on your screen. Impact of COVID-19, floods, high inflation, economic and political instability have left the country vulnerable and unable to cope with macro challenges, pushing poverty rates back to a projected 25.3% by 2023-24, thereby reversing years of hard-fought gains. This report attributed this trend to deep-rooted inequalities of opportunity, political instability, elite capture, and vulnerability to climate risks. The early decline in poverty was mainly driven by higher incomes from informal labor markets, providing over 95% of the jobs for those at the bottom of the distribution and labor movements, from low productivity agriculture to low quality services and construction, according to the report. The main drivers for poverty reduction over 2001 to 2018 was people moving to non-agricultural labor. Nearly 57.2% of the workforce was involved in non-agricultural labor, while only 18% was involved in agriculture sector. However, low productivity across sectors limits income benefits for those remaining in agriculture and those who moved out, thereby stalling income growth. The report highlights that while the incidence of poverty and the poverty gap have decreased over the past 2 decades, many Pakistanis continue to cluster around the poverty line, thereby highlighting the challenges to maintain poverty reduction during periods of shocks. A household is considered vulnerable if it has 50% or higher chance of experiencing poverty within the next 2 years. In 2019-20, pre-COVID-19, roughly one-third of Pakistanis were considered vulnerable to poverty. Consequently, more than half of the vulnerable population was at risk of falling into poverty when shocks like COVID-19 hit. This vulnerability to economic shocks stems from concentration in low productivity sectors and a lack of access to income and living standard improvement opportunities. While comparing Pakistan to international lower middle income poverty line of $4.20 per person per day, nearly 45% of Pakistanis were poor in 2018, a significant decrease from 80% in 2001. However, the poverty headcount is significantly higher than the average among regional peers and aspirational peers like Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey and Egypt. Even in the economic growth, the Pakistan remains behind. According to the World Bank, Pakistan's real GDP per capita growth has been slow and volatile, averaging 2% per year over the past 2 decades. The primary driver of the economic growth has been high government spending, which has fueled consumption and imports rather than investments. Over the past 2 decades, private consumption has constituted approximately 71% of total aggregate demand and has been the main contributor to GDP growth. Public debt of Pakistan reached 78% of GDP in 2022. It has significantly increased due to rigid expenditures and mismatch between provincial responsibilities and revenue assignments. A large portion of the government budget is allocated to pre-committed areas such as interest payments, transfers, subsidies and public sector salaries. As a result, the country faces issues related to balance of payment crisis, currency depreciation and rising inflation. This particularly affects food and energy prices disproportionately, impacting poor and vulnerable households. Another aspect about Pakistan's culture is that the report highlights is its love for elites that help drive political discourse in the country. The report states politics in the country is dominated by patronage with policy distortions that weaken governance and institutional performance in public service provision. These distortions allow elites to direct public sector rents and regulatory concessions to their allies rather than the public. The incomplete implementation of the devolution agenda has led to higher fiscal costs, regressive taxation and poor service delivery at the local level. Moreover, policy distortions favor the wealthy through subsidies and underpriced inputs, while client-patron relationships enable elites to control economic resources. The report also highlights the prevalence of high level of inequality in the country that sometimes is difficult to measure, as wealthier households are less likely to respond to survey and have income from rents not properly captured in household consumption and expenditure surveys. The actual inequality in Pakistan is likely higher than reported, according to the World Bank. Consumption based inequality measures in Pakistan have remained relatively stable, showing a consistent gap in consumption between the richest and the poorest. Between 2001 to 2018, the average household in the wealthiest group consumed about 4 times more than those in the poorest. When Pakistan's Household Integrated Economic Survey measures are adjusted using tax records from the Federal Board Revenue, a law enforcement agency of Pakistan that investigates tax crimes, it shows that individual income inequality may be 16% higher. The chart highlights that households in the highest quintile receive higher levels of welfare benefits, while the remaining 80% of the population remain clustered around much lower welfare levels, which reveals that the large aspiring middle class, not just the poor, experience poor living conditions and have low human capital endowments. The poverty reduction program of Pakistan over the last 2 decades has led to the emergence of a middle class. This middle class are a key driver for economic growth in Pakistan due to high purchasing power, improved skills and education level that increase productivity and tax revenue that is needed for public investment. According to the report, households with less than 50% chance of experiencing poverty in the next 2 years are classified as middle class. Due to significant differences within this group in terms of resources, living conditions, welfare levels and incomes, the report has further divided into 2 subgroups, the aspiring middle class and the middle class plus. In 2018, the aspiring middle class was the largest economic group, making up 42.7% of the population, whilst the middle class plus included 1 in 5 people. While aspiring middle class is no longer poor or vulnerable to poverty, but still struggles to achieve full economic security. Typically, these households are rural, consume about 50% above the poverty line and have an average of 6 members, with half being employed. In contrast, the middle class plus is economically secure with no real risk of falling into poverty. These households are mostly urban and consume 3 times the poverty line, tend to be smaller with fewer than 5 members, and most live in homes with concrete roofs, gas for cooking and bathrooms connected to covered or underground drains. Even on the social indicators, Pakistan lags behind. According to the World Bank report, Pakistan continues to remain behind in access like safe drinking water, electricity, education, women empowerment and infant mortality rates. While nearly 90% of households in Pakistan have access to drinking water, only half have safely managed access through methods that reduce contamination risk. Urban households are 3 times more likely to have piped water connections. Yet nearly 70% of both urban and rural households receive water for only 1 to 6 hours per day. Electricity coverage remains high with almost 95% households having access, but 68% of users nationwide have electricity for less than 16 hours a day, rising to 76% in rural areas. In the education sector as well, learning gaps persist not only in children but also in adults. The adult literacy rate, which is for people aged 15 and above, is 80% among the top quintile, which is the 20% of people, while it is only 32% for the bottom 20% of people. Less than half of the population over age 25 had completed primary education as of 2018. Only 1 in 5 adults over the age of 25 in the bottom quintile has completed primary education, compared to 4 in 5 adults in the top quintile. Among children, nearly 75% of up to the age 10 who go to school cannot read and understand a simple story. On the other hand, more than 25% of children aged between 5 to 9 remain out of schools in Pakistan, highest among peer nations like Ethiopia, Indonesia, Bhutan and Malaysia. While education situation remains challenging for children in Pakistan, for women it is far worse. Women and girls in Pakistan lag significantly behind the rest of the population in terms of educational access and attainment. The gender gap in education is particularly pronounced in rural areas such as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. Girls not only have lower attendance and enrollment rates compared to boys, but they are also more likely to drop out of schools at the end of primary education. The school system loses about 23% of boys and 28% of girls at primary education level. The exclusion of girls from the formal education system means that low educational outcomes for women will persist, perpetuating their segregation from higher productivity and higher income work, instead keeping them bound to roles as wives and mothers, thereby exacerbating the cycle of high fertility, poverty and child stunting. In terms of infant mortality rates, Pakistan leads the South Asia region. Nearly 53 out of every 1000 live births do not survive infancy, making the infant mortality rate in Pakistan almost twice as high as the rest of South Asia and 5 times higher than in the upper middle income countries of the world. Pakistan has also not seen any reduction in stunting rates over the past 20 years. Stunting refers to the impaired growth and development that children experience from poor nutrition, repeated infection and inadequate psychosocial stimulation. For those who survive infancy, stunting presents a severe challenge. Nearly 40% of children under the age of 5 suffer from stunted growth in Pakistan. The effects of stunting are largely irreversible, impairing a child's cognitive and physical development, leading to lower educational attainment, reduced economic productivity and diminished income earning potential. Amid all the highlighted issues, the World Bank suggests Pakistan to undertake bold reforms through strategic investments in human capital and public services starting from disadvantaged and remote districts. There is also a need to strengthen local governance by increasing transparency through enhanced digitization. To ensure long-term success, the World Bank advises Pakistan to prioritize fiscal interventions for the bottom 40% households despite limited availability of funds. According to the bank, this can be done by balancing optimal tax policy to promote growth while reducing the burden on the poorest segments of society, enhancing municipal financing mechanisms and eliminating inefficient subsidies that disproportionately benefit wealthier households. Thank you for tuning in. For more such videos, please subscribe to the Print YouTube channel.